This is the Allison in Wonderland Mental Health Podcast with your host, Allison Frye.
This is the place that looks through the looking glass and falls down the rabbit hole while discussing mental health.
Join this journey that isn't just about putting mental health into a box that is only about anxiety, depression, or other common topics.
Allison in Wonderland is about everything that is in that box, as well as all of the things that don't quite fit into a box.
Here is your host, mental health advocate, Allison Frye.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Allison in Wonderland Mental Health Podcast. I am so excited about our guest today, and we've got some really great points to go over with a really amazing topic. But as you know, I love to do, I'm going to have Lisa introduce herself, let us know a little bit about who she is as a person and why this topic that we're going into is so important to her. So Lisa, welcome to Allison in Wonderland.
Thank you, Allison. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Lisa Ford, and basically, as far as my credentials go, I was a teacher, I was a school counselor, I was a director of student services, and I'm now a therapist. So I have quite a lot of background when it comes to the credential aspect of it. And now I am creating my own company in which I'm helping parents, and I'm doing community outreach about mental health and learning disabilities and bridging the two and understanding missed learning gaps and a lot of that stuff. So that's who I am on paper. Who I am in real life is I am a mom of three teens. Actually, one is now going to be 21, so I guess I can't say that anymore. I had a very strong mental health background in myself. I was raised by a paranoid, bipolar, schizophrenic father, and I had to overcome a lot of mental health challenges within myself. I was in a toxic relationship in which I had to leave, and I battle, some situations within my own household of some of my children struggling with some mental health concerns. So that's who I am in a nutshell.
Yeah, I feel like I can relate to a lot of what you said. I think that a lot of the listeners can as well. And I also have a 21 and a 22-year-old, and I still refer to them as my teens.
Yes.
I don't know at what point they'll stop being considered my teenagers.
Mom, I'm not a teen anymore.
I know. It's great, but it's a lot of great experience. And also coming from a home of mental illness where my mother was bipolar and a pathological liar. And I also later found out that my brother was also suffered with bipolar disorder. I think that I also ended up in some toxic relationships, because where have you seen a healthy one? And two, I've always tried to be very mindful about the mental health of my children, because I lost my brother and my mother as a result of suicide. So I think I almost complicated things where I'd be on with my therapist and be like, oh my God, they did this, or are they bipolar? You know what I mean? So it's, I think it's definitely a really important topic to kind of let people know, what to look out for, how every child really is different. People are like, oh, I love my kids all the same, I treat them all the same. Everybody's different. You can't have the same relationship with any of your children, because they're all going to be so different. And that doesn't mean that you're treating one better or worse. You're meeting them as the person that they are. So I think that that's all really, really amazing. And then the topic of this call is there's always a cause behind the effect. So tell us a little bit about that. There's always a why. There's always a cause.
So we see behavioral displays. You can see, that there's some sort of spinning out of control. There's some sort of imploding something. There is always a source of pain behind it, whether it is someone turns to addiction, starts to, flip out in a way, whether or not someone starts to feel like they're not themselves. There's always a source of pain. So coping skills are when we're struggling with that pain, we find a way of coping. Finding a way of coping with that pain is not always a positive thing, because you want whatever way you can to cope with it. And sometimes it becomes self-implosive. Sometimes sometimes it becomes like, so we have 4 ways of avoiding trauma. It's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So when you're fighting, you're just trying to fight against the world. You're finding a way to, fight back with what you're dealing with. When you're flighting, you are running away from something. You are not dealing with it. You are avoiding it. You're doing whatever you can to not deal with it. When you are freezing, you're in this state of frozen, like roboticness or something where you just don't want to deal with it. That's where like repression, you don't want to think about it, or avoidance and things like that. That is where you're frozen. And then when you're fawn, you become the people pleaser. You want to do everything, make people happy, do everything you can. You sacrifice yourself. You don't understand your own boundaries, all of those things. So those are the 4 areas that we go to when we're creating coping skills. So when we talk about there's always a cause, there's always an effect behind the cause. I'm sorry, always a cause behind the effect. It has to do with those 4 things. And it's understanding which one of those 4 things we're showing as the effect, and then kind of going underneath those effects and finding the cause.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think it's also interesting to know that, like, in different situations, the same person will have a different reaction. I definitely see how, after the loss of my brother, I fell into that people pleasing. I tried to take care of the entire family, but did not
Right.
take care of myself.
Right.
But then where it comes to like my children, I go to instant fight mode where I am like
Mama llama, mama bear.
right, like where I am a force to be reckoned with. So it's like very difficult. And then also kind of the freeze state where, there is like repressed childhood trauma and things that it's just like for my entire adult life where I've been a mom, you can't really address those issues because you don't want to fall apart. So you just kind of keep them tucked away.
Yeah.
where they're, put up on the shelf for a little while. And I think that it's kind of interesting too, like thinking about how both of us came from childhoods where there was mental illness. And they always talk about how, children from homes with mental illness are able to read a room faster than anyone else, because you got to walk in and know, is this a day where my mom is going to take us on some random shopping spree that we can't afford, or the day where she's going to tackle my brother with a butcher knife? Like where are we at on the scale here?
That was my father, but I was there with you.
Yes, exactly. And so I think a lot of people with that learn to do that end up in some type of mental health arena when they get older, because like they've already learned how to, witness what's going on with someone, empathize, read the room, which it's terrible that we go through those things. But it's also good that there are people that can see that there's maybe a little bit more going on than what someone's trying to say on the surface.
Without a doubt. And that's why my form of therapy is a little different than some of the other, like I don't do like the old man on the couch type thing where it's just all up in my head and I'm psychoanalyzing. I mean, I psychoanalyze because that's what I have to do, but I prefer with psychoeducation. That's what I call it, where I basically work with my clients to say, this is what's going on with you. This is why you're seeing. Can you see this pattern? Do you understand this? Do you understand that this is the learning pattern that you're creating, or the coping skill that you've adapted, or the direction, or the continuous thing that you're doing over and over again, and bring it to their attention. And then I kind of say, okay, we see this. Do you like this? Do you not like this? So what can we do? What can we do to change this? So I'm very big on psychoeducation. I'm also a former English teacher, so I'm huge on books. So I'm always like saying, read this book, watch this TED Talk, do this and that, because I feel like I don't want to be the source of like, this is where you are. I want someone to do their own research to understand where they are, just like we're doing. This is what we're doing. We're researching what we came from, why we are the way we are, and what we can do to sort of unravel the things that we learned. And I think one of the big things we do once we unravel ourselves is we want to do outreach and empowerment of others. Like you said, you want to work on empowering others, and I'm actually looking on empowering communities and organizations and families and parents. So I think it's that same idea.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I mean, it really is so true where a lot of people are like, when they look at children and I've had teachers that when my kids were growing up, I've had some amazing teachers for them, and I've had some terrible ones where where I'm almost was like, before it was easy to homeschool your kids, and when I didn't want to isolate them, I still thought about ripping one of my kids out of school just because the experience. I left, meetings with teachers, with a child that was a first grader where they left me crying at the end of it
Yeah,
because
I've been there.
the,
I've
the
been there.
teacher literally sent my children to the playground after school hours without asking me if it was okay if they went and played on the playground. And I have serious trust issues of other humans, so I would have never done that. And then like immediately was just like very animated. Your child drives me crazy. And I'm just sitting there thinking, how am I sending him to this person every day? And I left crying. And they then pushed me into an IEP process where
And
they
you probably had no clue what was going on in
they
that process.
said that he had a learning disability, that he had dyslexia, he had speech issues. So he ended up with the speech teacher. And that was a thing. It was interesting because my oldest had such a large vocabulary at a very young age that I asked about his speech issues from a pediatrician. And he said, he just knows bigger words than he should. So it sounds like there are speech issues, but it did end up being like a speech problem. And then your younger children learn so much from your older children, so they both ended up in speech therapy in elementary school. It was because
Wow, it's
you don't know,
interesting how philosophies and ages and generations look
have
at things
changed in like
so
20. Yeah.
differently. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a doctor who told me you can't put your daughter on ADHD medicine. It's just speed. It's just a stimulant. You're just, and I'm like, my daughter can't focus,
Yeah.
and it's interesting how people perceive things in a different way.
When I
And
was a kid, everybody was getting put on ADHD medicine. If you misbehaved in class, you immediately had ADHD, and they were giving you, and everybody was on Ritalin. It was definitely.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. When I was a kid, and I'm probably older than you, I don't know, maybe we're around the same, I don't know.
I mean, our kids are about the same age. We're probably
Yeah,
around
so
the
we're
same
probably
age.
around the same age. When I was a kid, you had the bad kid classes, and then you had smart kid classes. And the bad kid classes were instantly, the kids were always getting in trouble, this and that. Learning disabilities were not a thing. You instantly knew who was having a problem in their house, and this one had this father, or this one had this, and this one had that. It was a horrible thing to but they never looked at a person's capability. They never looked at where the strengths are and where the weaknesses are. It was like you were separated, like you belong in this cage, you belong in this cage, and thankfully we moved a lot away from that.
Yeah, and I think that, with the good teachers that we've had over the years, you could tell where, yes, they're all very restrained to like this curriculum that they have to follow and these things that they have to do, but you could tell where they saw the students or the kids as people with different personalities, where like one of my kids that would go from having teachers that loved him to teachers that hated him. He just had so much personality, and I look back at it and I'm like, did I screw my kid up where he'd be 2 at Cracker Barrel coloring on the menu, and someone would be like, oh, you need to color in the lines, and I'm like,
color inside the lines, right?
and I would say, and I'd be like, no, he can color outside the lines, he can create his own lines, he doesn't have to color in the lines. But so that's how I raised him. And then he gets to kindergarten and they're like, he doesn't even know how to color in the lines. And I'm like, oops.
Yeah, we're kind of damned if we do, damned if we don't as parents, right? It's like you either create this, you're overprotective, and this person has to be so in the lines that they become like anxiety prone, or you teach them to draw outside of, they become this eclectic person, and then they're sort of like isolated by society. It's just
Right.
crazy.
Yeah. It's definitely very interesting how that happens. But
Right.
I mean, like, I know that we had talked a little before the call about how you kind of help with as a parent advocate when it comes to the IEPs and the 504s. And I've been through both of those processes. And when we transferred school with my child that had been forced into an IEP, they then put him into a class that was
Doesn't
for
exist
people with
now.
learning disabilities. And he was getting so frustrated with the children in the classroom. And they also had all been in first grade together and moved all, like, even the teacher moved to second grade. So he
Yeah.
was the odd person out. He did not actually have a learning disability.
Oh.
And he would get so frustrated that they said he'd go on bathroom breaks all the time. And what they realized was he was just walking around the school. So
Yeah,
they
he
did.
needed to decompress probably. His
Right.
brain was just going and going.
It was just too much going on in the
Mhm.
classroom. And so then he was also struggling with work because, he was not where he should have been.
Right.
And it took a long time to get him out of the IEP. It took the whole school year. But we did come up with a thing where at least the teachers, we met with the IEP meeting and they were like, well,
So,
if he needs this time, instead of lying and saying he needs to go to the bathroom, he can have like one pass a day to go walk around the hall.
hold on a minute, Allison. My computer's doing a little crazy thing.
Okay.
Technology works great when it works. Okay, I'm good.
Oh, yeah, I know. So I mean, it's a really difficult process. And then when he got into high school and we were learning from home with COVID, I then had to go through testing to get him on a 504 for his ADD so that he could have extended time on things.
Right.
And really, it wasn't even so much about extended time. He needed to listen to music. This was actually pre-COVID and then went into it.
I have a daughter like that, yeah, who needs to
He
listen to
needed to
music
listen
too.
to music and he was
Mhm,
not allowed to have his phone or his earbuds in
mhm,
during schoolwork.
mhm.
And so he did get like the whole extended time on test, but he never used that. But the main reason for the 504, where I had to take him to a therapist office and have him do all this testing and stuff, was to allow him to listen to his earbuds to drown everyone else out. And it's just
And
like,
that is his way of learning. And the thing that drives me crazy as an educator is that we are taught to learn differentiated learning. We are taught to learn Gardner's multiple intelligences, and both of which basically say that there are different ways in which students learn. And we need to understand which way that student is learning and meet that student where they're learning. And if we're not paying attention to where that student is learning most successfully, they're not going to meet their maximum potential. Now, the hard thing, and I know this, I know any educator listening to this is going to say, are you kidding me? I've got 30 some kids in this class and I've got
and
like,
I'm allowed to do these certain
right,
rules
I've
and
got
this.
like 15, 15 IEPs, 504s. I've got this standard of learning that I've got to meet. I've got this, that, and that is the hard part in itself, because the educator, I mean, and that's why so many people left education. And
Oh
that's
my
why
gosh, this
I left
mass exodus
education.
that we've seen
Yeah.
recently.
It's because
Yeah.
everyone wants to blame the educator. And the educator is making not great money, quite honestly. And I don't even want to hear that they're off in the summers, because if you see all that they deal with in the winters, you'll understand why
And
they're
I've also seen these teachers off in the summers as waiters at the restaurants we go to. Like,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
like they're
So there's so
the
many
off
good
with
things
the
about
summers
it.
only really helps if their kids are also off at the summers and they're not having to pay for daycare because of the summer. Like that's
And one thing to understand is when they're off in the summers, 10% of each paycheck is going to a summer thing
yeah.
throughout the year. So I'm
Mm,
just going to, support my teachers in that way. So understanding that.
yeah.
But with the idea that teachers are trying to do everything they can, educators are trying to do everything, but the schools are just, they're so overwhelmed that they can't meet all of these needs. So there's got to be this mental health initiatives that they put in schools. It needs to be separated. When I was a school counselor and they wanted me to focus specifically on their post-secondary needs and their career advisement needs, and then in addition to that, I dealt with the mental health breakdown of all of these kids. And the confidentiality in the sense that I could not tell the parents not tell the teachers what I was dealing with.
Yeah.
FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which is basically a HIPAA in schools. So I can't tell someone if a child's being abused. I can't tell someone if a child's dealing with, a bipolar parent or an alcoholic parent or this or that. And when I have a teacher coming to me and saying they've got a D in my class, they're not doing homework, I can't say there's no electric home at that house. That kid's taking care of 5 of their siblings while the parent's out, doing drugs down the corner. All of those things are separate. So when I actually left education, I was just so burned out by the fact that I was dealing with so much mental health stuff. And then I had my own daughter who had a mental health situation, and I had to focus on the post-secondary and the career advisement and all of that stuff and not paying attention to the mental health. So the mental health initiative needs to get stronger. We are in a state of crisis. The government corruption, the economy, all of everything, we're all struggling with our mental health. So the idea of saying that mental health just stays in the family, that, your skeletons stay in the closet. I joked around with a couple different podcasts and I said, I don't want to keep the skeletons in the closet. I want to take them out and make them dance.
Right. Yeah.
It shouldn't be there. It should be when you are dealing with 1 in 5 individuals and 1 in 6 individuals who have diagnosed mental health situations. That's just diagnosed and what we know about in our world. Then it shouldn't be that we make this seem like it's such a weird thing. And then you're talking about the mental health piece of it. That's the mental health piece of it. Then there's a whole nother piece, the learning disability piece that we talked about. Does the kid have ADHD? Does the kid have some sort of a brain issue that's going on? Is there dyslexia? Is there dyscalculia? Is there dysgraphia? I mean, so many different pieces of that. And so what I'm seeing in my 20-some-year-old clients is they're just giving up. They're automatically not thinking about a career. They're automatically thinking they can barely walk out of the house and barely go into a place without having an anxiety attack. It's hysterical. So, but this whole thing that we're all dealing with some mental health piece, whether it's the idea that we feel overwhelmed or we feel anxious or we feel stuck or we feel not good enough or we feel confused or we feel something, it comes from the fact that we feel. And feeling is something that needs to be felt. I have a client who said to me the other day, Miss Lisa, I'm crying a lot and I feel embarrassed because I'm crying. And one of my favorite movies for mental health is Inside Out. Any parents on there who have not showed this to your kid, I don't care what age they are, they should see that movie because it's basically about the importance of emotions and how it controls a person. And they tried to keep sadness out of it. They wouldn't put sadness there because they didn't want to see the crying. And when they didn't have sadness, all the world kept collapsing. The kid was just going, into this like behavioral spin. Finally, they pushed sadness out there. The tears came and the world started to rebuild. Why? Because crying is cleansing. Crying is cleansing. And if we understand, we don't want to cry continuously, but we're holding some source of pain inside. And our brain is like a container. It gets so overwhelmed. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to get the stuff out. When you cry, you are cleansing your body, you are cleansing your brain, and you are able to retake information back into your brain, and you're able to move on. It's a regroup. So crying, I don't want to hear anymore that crying is for babies and crying is cleansing.
Or boys shouldn't cry and things like
Exactly.
that. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think also what's really interesting about that movie is it's not just that they're trying to push sadness behind, they're trying to keep joy as the number one
That's the
emotion.
number one. People
And
pleasing.
right. And
Like we
I
just
think
talked
that
about.
even outwardly, like, yes, that's going on inwardly, but other people want you to show your joy. It's why you can be grieving someone and they'll be like, how are you doing? Well, they don't want a real answer because
They just want you
obviously
to say, I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Mhm.
Everyone just expects like it to be normal, not like,
Right.
hey, what's been going on with you or how, Have you been able to get enough food while you're going through
Right,
this? Is,
right,
can I come do your laundry? Don't ask how they're doing. Just
right,
assume that they're
right,
not doing great. Like,
right. Yeah, if
um,
you ask a person, "How are you?" And when I was an English teacher, someone would say, "How are you?" And instead of saying, "I'm doing fine," or something, I would say something else, and they'd say, you know, "Well, you're supposed to answer according to your health." And I said, "Well, I don't answer according to my health. I answer according to my disposition, because
yeah.
I think that's where I was supposed to answer."
Yeah. And I think that what's really interesting too is like, even with all of that, like every child is different. And you
Mhm.
have 3 kids, I have 3 kids, and I can tell
All
you
different.
they're all very
Mhm.